Hey folks, I'm Attorney P. Foley, and several years ago I was in a courtroom, and while I was in the courtroom handling a motion to suppress, there was a downward departure. Public Defender's Office was filing a motion, arguing a motion, asking the judge to depart from the punishment guidelines and to give their client probation or a lesser sentence. And the judge ultimately gave this individual 3 years of prison. And there was something that didn't sit right with me, didn't sit right with a fellow attorney that was, her and I were working together at the time. And I don't know, I went home that weekend, and this was like a Thursday or Friday, and over the weekend I just kept thinking about it. And I happened to be in court the next Monday, but prior to that weekend, I called up a doctor, guy named Dr. Brannon, and he's a well-known forensic psychologist and helps in criminal cases. And he's been appointed on cases, and I've hired him on cases. And there's other doctors, but I reached out to him and I said, hey, something just seems odd about the person, about the case. Would you help me? And he said, yeah, I'm going to be over at the jail. I'll talk to the guy and, try to help you out. So he goes over there, and the guy's already been shipped off to prison. So I go to court that Monday or Tuesday. I see the judge. I said, Judge, can I go sidebar with you? And of course, with the state, it's not a private conversation. I said, Judge, there was a case. And she's like, no, I granted your motion. I go, not that case, Judge. There's another case right before me. And the individual was sentenced to 3 years. And I said, I don't know what it is, but, my inner voice or whatever it is, I just want an opportunity to talk to him. She's like, are you asking me to bring him back from prison? I go, yes, Judge. I'm going to volunteer my time, take a look at the case, and then kind of get back to the state. And the state wasn't happy. I guess that's a fair assumption. So she brings him back. My fellow attorney and I go to see him in the jail, and he's like, hello, thank you so much for coming to see me. And he's like this happy guy, and I'm like I asked him, do you know me? No, but I'm so happy you come to visit me. And he, he had this accent, and he had this innocence about him. And we sat there in the jail and talked to him for a few hours, and we found out that he had lost his mother, that he had a brother, that he had been going to a mental hospital for several years, that it had closed down. But someone with the state had told him, if you could get your social security information, find your brother, get your social security information, we could help you get a job. So he went on this trek to find his brother. And he didn't have much money. He only had I think the government gave him like $5 a day or something, and some medication. And he gets on a bus and takes the train and goes, several cities over, within the same county, but, and when he gets off the train, he runs into someone that he remembers knowing as a kid. And he's a young man. And when I say young, he's probably early 20s. He runs into this other young man, and he says, hey, I remember, and they remember each other, and they have a conversation. He goes, I'm looking for my brother. And I'm trying to do the accent, but he had a very distinct accent. And he's like, this friend, this other young man goes, I will help you look. And they start searching the town, the city, looking for his brother. Hi, do you know my brother John? That kind of thing. And of course, people don't know him, and like, no, I don't know him, and they go the other way. Well, again, he only had a few dollars in his pocket. He used some of that for food and some of that to take the train and the bus. And as the night came to a close, he asked that other young man, hey, could I crash at your place? I don't have enough money. We spent the money, grabbing some food and looking for my brother. So that person asked his family member, and they go, hell no, you can't stay at our house. And so this young man says to my client, hey, if you, there's an apartment complex down there, and all the people have moved out and it's abandoned, but I know that there's some electric on in some of the units. So he goes, you could probably stay there for the night. So he goes there, and there's a mattress in an apartment. There's a Bible in the apartment, and there is one ring inside a cabinet. Nothing else is there. It's an empty apartment. My client and this friend bring a television and a PlayStation, so he has something to do in the evening. So he brings a PlayStation. Now keep in mind, folks, he was charged for a burglary of a dwelling, a 2nd degree felony, and a theft charge, a 3rd degree felony. After he tells me this, I'm like, well, didn't you tell your attorney? He's like, yeah, I told him the same story I told you. But this attorney didn't file it in his motion, didn't explain it to the court, didn't share it with the state attorney's office. So myself and the other attorney, we write a motion to vacate the plea, to take him out of prison and to restart the case. And at that time, I get a call from a prosecutor who I didn't know, who was relatively high up in the state attorney's office. And the gentleman was very angry, cursed at me, asked me who the F I was. And I'm like, what? Like, what do you like, hey, this is what's going on. This guy didn't care. And he goes, you know what? I'm going to take the case and I'm going to go against you. And I'm like, okay, like, you know. So I file a motion, I pull all kinds of case law, and I have to reach out to the prior attorney because the prior attorney did a real, I had to call the Florida bar and all these things. And I told the other attorney, I said, listen, you're going to have to testify. This isn't good for you because you didn't do your job. And there's a young man in prison. And the facts should have been, put out there. So I meet with that attorney and go, look, I'm going to ask you these questions. You either fall on the sword or I'm going to take out the sword, that kind of thing. And listen, the attorney was a nice person. He admitted that, he dropped the ball and he was willing to testify and say it. So I set a hearing and the judge was a little surprised by the prosecutor that was coming in because this guy who had kind of cursed me out, she's like, what are you doing here? This isn't this isn't news case, that kind of thing. And the guy was just rude, man. It was just rude. And I don't remember his name. It doesn't matter. Maybe he was having an off week or whatever. I don't know. But I believe in justice and doing the right thing. So, I drafted this long motion to vacate it. And ultimately, it's weird. Although the judge took me sidebar and said, I want you to file a complaint against the defense attorney, which I didn't do. On the day that we were vacating it, the state said that they were going to object and said, oh, well, whatever. But ultimately, the judge is granting my motion to vacate. But I wanted the person to be out. And, it's anticlimactic, right? Because I got the result. I vacated the plea. But what happened was instead of going to prison for a few years, we were able to get one of the charges changed and the person went on mental health probation. And, I gave myself a pat on the back, the little voice, help out another person. But I recently told this story to somebody and I was trying to remember the person's name and I looked them up. And the sad part is, and that person called me every once in a while, say, hey, I'm doing good, and I found my brother, and all of these things. And he was on mental health probation, and he was getting treatment, and he was taking medication, but he had, a very serious issue. And again, Dr. Brannon had diagnosed that issue. But it wasn't necessarily an issue of competence, right? He understood what a judge did and a prosecutor and the basics. So, ultimately he was deemed competent, but there was enough because of the lawyer's mistakes and the ineffective assistance of counsel and the truth not coming to light, there was enough to get it vacated. Now, the prosecutor and I that bumped heads, he ultimately agreed to mental health probation and we did it that way. And, a lot of people would say, hey, it was a win. But there's a part of me that goes, I should have just went further. But remember, I'm at the whim of the client, and I did this case pro bono. But when I looked it up last week, I saw that even though it was mental health, and even though every once in a while this gentleman would call me and say things were good, it looks like he violated his probation, and he ended up going to prison for, I think, 2 years. And, it's always been one of the things that I was proud of, that I stood up for someone. Whatever, the inner voice, the man upstairs, you use your ability to articulate, to tell a story, to lawyer, to help people. And I always felt good about it, and I still feel good about it, but I feel harmed to know that I guess he didn't get in touch with me. I don't know what happened, but ultimately he violated his probation somehow, and people who have mental illness do that. And I always had that little inkling, like I should just went further with it. Even though the judge was having a bad day that day, I was like, I'm not going to let him out today, Mr. Foley. Even though I'm granting your motion, I'm not going to address a bond. You're going to have to do that. And it was the holidays, and it was Christmas, and I wanted him out. And I talked to him, and I said, look, you can get out now, and we could do this plea, and you'll be mental health probation, you'll get it. And he understood everything, and he selected to do that. But I remember he was going to be in prison for 3 years. So there was that part of me that said, I'd stay there, another 30 days, we'll have a hearing, I'll get you out, and then I'll address the case properly, like if he had paid me the big bucks to do it. And I get it, inside he chose, and it didn't work out because he ultimately ended up going to prison, but I always want to do better. I'm sharing this story because I was talking to someone today in court about it, and I just remember how angry the prosecutor was with me. Like, who are you to stick your nose into something? And I'm just thinking I'm doing the right thing. And I remember making enemies over this case. I'm going, you have a mentally ill person who went into apartment. Oh, by the way, I went to the apartments myself. I didn't have money to hire an investigator. I went to the apartments myself, and I took pictures, and it doesn't really matter, but I attached the pictures and the video, and it said no trespassing. The premises were vacated. They were like uninhabitable. But someone came home who wasn't supposed to be living there either, probably sleeping on that mattress, and said that the ring had been stolen, which was like a left hoop, like sitting in a thing. Oh, there was a can of soup in the container, and there was one pot. And he got a can opener from the other kid and opened up and made soup. They brought the TV and the PlayStation. He fell asleep. He woke up, and he woke up to a woman screaming, like, what are you doing here? Because I guess she had just come home, or she was squatting too, I guess. And just a sad story, right? Do people go to prison for things like that? They do, folks. And I did well, but I didn't do my best. And he ended up going to prison. Sometime after, a year later, he violated and went to prison for 2 years on a case that should have been a trespassing case, and maybe a petty theft case instead of a burglary of a dwelling. I think I got them to change it from burg dwelling to burg structure, so it didn't score prison time. So I made changes, and it was for the better, but it wasn't the perfect result, and that's the reality in life. You don't always get the perfect result, but I don't know. I was thinking about this, and I decided to share. So I'm Attorney Roger P. Foley, and this is one of my cases that I had. Have a great day.